Hi everybody, TJ Mack and Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. And today I'm going to share some of the key cards in my collection from the 1972 Topps football set. Now, as you know, if you watch my channel, this is the core focus of my collecting. The key cards from football, baseball, and hockey sets from the 1950s until the 1980s. And I have playlists set up with previous videos done. I'll share those listings in the description down below. So the 1972 Topps football card set consists of 351 cards that were issued in 3 series. This was Topps' largest football set at the time. The last series contains 88 cards, numbered 264 to 351, and those cards are much tougher to find, and they sell for a premium. Now, I read an article in Sports Collector's Digest that stated the cards were sold in Milwaukee and a few other areas and did not perform very well. Supposedly, famed card collector Larry Frisch bought 50 wax cases containing 15 boxes in each case for just $5 a case. And now I'm going to share with you an excerpt out of a magazine that shows the 1972 Topps cards for sale back in 1972. So here you see the Series 1 and Series 2, 264 cards being sold. It says, looks like it's available Series 1 on 9/15 and Series 2 on 10/15, 1972 for just $5.95. As we've talked about before, when I show these, it'd be nice to go back to those days. But there was no Series 3 listed in here, and I can't confirm, but like I said, what I read in Sports Collector's Digest is that they were really considered like a test issue, the Series 3 cards. Now, the 1972 set's a very clean design with the team's name displayed prominently in large block capital letters. It's encased in an array of colors depending on the team. And you can see here they have the black piping that helps frame the photo nicely. I like when Topps adds that little subtle feature to the cards. And as you can see in these two examples, they came in both horizontal and vertical formats. And I think it's just a very simple and beautiful design. Now, if I turn the cards over, you can see it's a gray card stock, and there's some green on there as well. They feature the player's name, position, and team arranged across the top, and the rest of the cards broken into 2 sections. On the left, you got the vital statistics, and then a cartoon about the player, along with a circle containing the card number. And then the right side features a biography and year-by-year statistics for most of the players. Now, this set is loaded with prominent rookies, or what I would call first cards, since football tends to issue cards after players in the league for several years. Now, there are 9 Hall of Fame rookies or first cards, of which I do have all of them in my collection, and here are 2 of them on display. This is Emmitt Thomas's first card. His rookie year as a player was 1966, but you see he doesn't have a debut card until 1972. Now, next to him, you have Hall of Fame outside linebacker Ted Hendricks, and this would be his first card. I believe he debuted in 1969. Now, he was nicknamed the Stork, and he was so great that he made both the 1970s and 1980s All-NFL teams. He only played 4 years in the 80s until 1983, but was a first or second team All-Pro 3 of those 4 years. Now, here are a couple superstar, which I would call first cards of the time. They're not Hall of Famers, but you got 2-time Super Bowl champion Jim Plunkett, and he was also the 1971 Sporting News Rookie of the Year. And next to him is the first card of Lyle Alzado. Now, you can see here they're both wearing the same jersey, and I've talked about this in videos in the past, but these were college all-star jerseys, and other players in the set are featured in this jersey as well. To help us go through this season, I decided to include this 1972 All-Pro Football magazine from my father-in-law's collection. Now, in 1971, Roger Staubach took over as a starting quarterback after a Week 7 Halloween loss to the Chicago Bears. In that game, Coach Tom Landry foolishly switched out Staubach and Craig Morton after each play. And then after the game, Landry decided to go with Staubach, and then a legend was born. He led the Cowboys to 10 consecutive wins, including a 24-3 rout of the Miami Dolphins in the Super Bowl. And Staubach also won the game MVP. I knew in the 1970s there were comparisons between the wholesome Roger Staubach and the free-swinging counterculture icon Joe Namath. Now, this comparison between the two peaked in a 1975 interview with NFL Today co-host Phyllis George. And Staubach responded to his perceived all-American image. And he was slightly annoyed, but he was lighthearted when he said that everyone compares me to Joe Namath. He is single, living the bachelor, swinging lifestyle. While I like sex as much as Joe Namath, the difference is I do it with one girl. Now, what I learned about in this magazine is that the comparison between the two started a few years earlier in 1972. In this magazine, it talks about the Christian family man Staubach was versus the worldly ladies' man that Joe Namath was. Fair or unfair, that is how it came off. The square Staubach and the Broadway Joe. At that time, they were the only two quarterbacks under 30 years old to win a Super Bowl. Now, Staubach did it when he was a starter, not until 29 years old of age because he was serving in the Navy. He was actually a year older than Joe Namath, even though Namath was an established superstar at this point. Now, a lot of the article focused on the fact that most quarterbacks called their own plays, but Staubach didn't. This was something that plagued him for most of his career. Other than for a short time, Landry called the plays in the Cowboys' offense, which hurt Staubach, who took his leadership role seriously. Well, in 1972, Staubach separated his shoulder and only played 4 regular season games. He did come back for the playoffs, where he relieved a struggling Craig Morton in the fourth quarter to lead the Cowboys to 17 unanswered points as they beat the 49ers 39-28. Next week, they would lose to the Redskins in the NFC Championship. Now, Joe Namath had a career year in 1972, finishing second team All-Pro as he led the NFL in passing yards with 2,816 and touchdowns with 19. Now, here are 3 of the great quarterbacks of the 1960s. You have arguably the best quarterback of the AFL in Lenny Dawson. He was a 3-time AFL champion, 2-time All-Pro, and won Super Bowl IV against the Vikings. In the center, you have the greatest quarterback of the 60s and the 3-time MVP, Johnny Unitas. When he retired in 1973, he was the all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns. And then next to him, you have Fran Tarkington, who would eventually break Unitas' passing yard record and touchdown record. Now, in the magazine, there's a very interesting article that talks about the trade that brought Tarkington back to the Vikings. Now, he was an original Viking when the franchise started in 1961, and he played there until 1966. The Vikings coach, Norman Brocklin, grew tired of Tarkington's refusal to be a pocket passer. Tarkington was one of the best scramblers ever, and Van Brocklin, who was a Hall of Fame quarterback himself, was a pocket passer. So in 1967, the Vikings traded Tarkington to the Giants, who were eager to take Tarkington as the franchise had fallen on very hard times, and Tarkington was said to be the answer to compete for headlines with the Jets, Joe Namath, who was the rival AFL's biggest star. So they wanted to have 2 Giants in New York, and Tarkington and Namath. Well, Tarkington played well in New York, but he did not have the charisma that Joe Namath had. They also didn't win a championship like the Jets did under Namath. And the Vikings, by the time 1972 rolled around, they were in desperate need of a quarterback to go along with their outstanding defense, and they made a trade for Tarkington. And Tarkington in this article is very critical of the trade because he thought that the Giants could have got more for their defense in the deal for him. And again, this is just the nice little observations you can make when you read these magazines and get the contemporary views. Now, Tarkington would go on to lead the Vikings to 3 Super Bowls in the 1970s. Unfortunately, they were all losses, but he also won the 1975 NFL MVP. The Giants continued to be pretty bad until the early 1980s. Now, here is the last card of Gale Sayers, who actually retired in 1971, and below him is the great Dick Butkus. Now, the magazine has an article on the movie Brian Song, which originally aired in November 1971. Of course, it's one of the greatest made-for-TV movies of all time, and the article talks about it airing again in 1972 and the excitement surrounding it. Got to remember, this is the day before VCRs and social media where you can go on YouTube and watch clips and all of that. So it was a big deal when this movie came back on again. Well, Sayers was played by Billy D. Williams in the movie, and you can see a picture of Billy D. right there. Dick Butkus played himself. 1972 saw the rise of the Pittsburgh Steelers as one of the great teams in the NFL. Here we have the second-year Bradshaw and Me Joe Green cards and the first card of L.C. Greenwood. Now, the magazine picked them to win the division, and they did with an 11-3 record. They beat the Raiders in the playoffs in the famous Immaculate Reception game before losing to the Dolphins 21-17 in the conference championship. Here are the Miami Dolphins, represented by Bob Greasy, Larry Zonka, and Larry Little. All three are Hall of Famers, and this is Little's first card. Of course, we know in 1972 the Dolphins defeated the Redskins in the Super Bowl, capping off a 17-0 season. They are still the only undefeated team in NFL history. Zonka finished fourth in the NFL that year with 1,117 rushing yards. Greasy only started 5 regular season games in 1972 due to injury. Earl Morrall quarterbacked the team in the other 9 games. But Greasy did start and win the Super Bowl. There are first cards of 4 Hall of Fame linemen in this set, which may be the most of any. I never really checked. I just showed the Larry Little, who was a 5-time All-Pro guard. You also have 6-time All-Pro right tackle Ron Yari, 3-time All-Pro tackle Rayfield Wright, which is a very tough, high-number card. I bought this one many years ago for $30. This is easily a $300 to $400 card now in a grade 7. Then you have this Gene Upshaw, who was a 5-time All-Pro with the Oakland Raiders. Here are wide receivers who got their start in the AFL. This is Charlie Joyner's first card. He started in the league in 1969, which was the last year of the AFL, where he played 7 games with the Oilers. When Joyner wrapped up his Hall of Fame career in 1986, he was the all-time leader in receptions with 750 and receiving yards with 12,146. Then you have Lance Allworth, who in my view was the best receiver of the 1960s, playing for the AFL's Chargers. He was the first AFL player to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. This is his second to last card, where he finished his career with the Dallas Cowboys. And then at the end, we have the Raiders' Fred Biletnikoff. The sure-handed receiver was a first-team All-Pro in 1972, finishing second in the NFL in receptions with 58. Imagine that today. Boy, the game has changed. This pair of running backs are the only 2 in the set to finish their career with over 10,000 yards. This is O.J. Simpson's third-year card, and it was his breakout season as he led the NFL with 1,251 yards. This was his first of 4 rushing titles. Then you have John Riggins, shown here on his first card. Riggins did it differently than most running backs. He started in 1971, and through his age 28 season, had only one 1,000-yard season. From age 29 to 36, he had 4 1,000-yard seasons and scored a then NFL record 24 rushing touchdowns in 1983, and followed it up in 1984 with 14 touchdowns at the age of 35. He was a powerful and durable runner with surprising speed. Here's Mr. Cowboy Bob Lilly, who, like Ted Hendricks, was all NFL in 2 decades, in the 1960s and 70s. Arguably the greatest defensive tackle of his era, he was a 7-time first-team All-Pro before retiring in 1974. And next to him is Deacon Jones, in my view the greatest defensive end of his era, looking a little out of place in this red jersey and also on the Chargers versus the LA Rams, where he was best known. Now, Deacon is unofficially 3rd all-time in sacks with 173.5, and that's because sacks were not an official statistic until 1982, which was 8 years after he retired. And next to him, you have wide receiver Bullet Bob Hayes. Hayes was the fastest man in football in the 1960s, the only player to win a gold medal in the Olympics and a Super Bowl. So here you have it. These are some of my 1972 Topps cards. There's some others that I'd like to add over time, like the Alan Page and Larry Brown and Archie Manning, and some others, but I'll get those in time. No hurry. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and everybody have a great weekend.